right, hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's SAP Ariba Supplier Risk demo webinar. My name is Ken Miklos with SAP Ariba and SAP Fieldglass. We have 30 minutes with you today, and for the first 20 minutes or so, my colleague Sanad Burkic will walk you through a brief setup for some context and a product demonstration of the SAP Ariba Supplier Risk offering. After that, we'll open things up to answer questions from you. So don't wait, though. There is a Q&A applet, and if you have any questions during the webcast and during Sanad's presentation, you could submit those through the Q&A engagement tool. We'll get to as many questions as possible today, but if we run out of time, we will try to answer all questions via email, so definitely keep your questions coming. Before I turn things over to Sanad, just a really quick housekeeping item. A copy of today's slides and a link for more information is available in the resource guide. And certainly for your best viewing experience, we do recommend closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background that could cause issues. And finally, you'll find some additional answers to technical questions located in the Help Engagement tool at the bottom of your screen. Finally, an on-demand version of this webcast will be available shortly after and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. So with that out of the way and without further ado, Sanad, let me turn things over to you.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks, folks, for attending today. A little bit of legal housekeeping. Where there may be some discussions around future roadmap developments, so I've got to put the obligatory legal disclaimer up, but we'll get pretty much straight into the content shortly. So we just wanted to really touch on, the changing landscape of supplier risk management. 5 years ago, relatively stable markets, in terms of CPOs, it wasn't a really big ticket item. Only 20% of CPOs that were actually interested in supplier risk as a top priority. It was highly siloed and highly manual. And a lot of organizations, and I've certainly witnessed this myself, they've basically been dealing with it in a silo, maybe a legal team, maybe somebody that, shares a bit of information via email. In terms of where the process is heading, based on some research and insights drawn from a number of research that you'll see listed on the slide here today, we're in an environment of supply chain expansion, GDPR, trade wars, cyber attacks, a heavy focus on protecting brand reputation. The research is saying CPOs now 41% are heavily involved in risk management. I find myself we are continually being invited in by CPOs to talk about this, and a number of years ago, obviously that wasn't really the predominant case. There's a focus on getting metrics beyond operational metrics, into looking at factors such as environmental, social, forced labor, of course, is very topical now as well, with a lot of legislation coming in the region. And also, leveraging elements like AI and machine learning towards an integrated single, source to pay and supplier risk system. So based on the research, we've picked out from the current trends that, systems will, to get to be 2020 compliant around risk, systems will need to be integrated for risk management. They'll need to have a broad range of risk covered. They'll need to be able to be, leveraged across all teams, not just a single legal person, but supply chain, category management, across multiple stakeholders in the organization. And obviously to replace manual processes, spreadsheets, emails, Word documents. So based on these requirements, the takeaway is, systems will be required to be fully integrated through the source-to-pay process, monitoring all your ERP suppliers and all the processes around risk captured in system. As well as that, we need to be able to measure more than just operational KPIs. This is really critical coming out from the research. And because we're moving away from siloed teams, everybody has a different view. Somebody dealing with supply chain is not interested in seeing supplier information around a marketing supplier, right? It has to be contextual, it has to be actionable, and provide insight to the relevant team members, the information they're interested in seeing. And of course, to remove manual processes, there needs to be processes need to be mandated, consistent, and systemized within system. And of course, leveraging as much of the technology that we can. So, the solution that we're presenting today is Ariba Supplier Risk, which really takes on board, pretty much most of the research that we've seen today in terms where systems are going, and it's an evolving area, and we continue to evolve in this area, and I'll be demonstrating the SAP Ariba Supplier Risk solution today. So just some quick information in terms of some of the overall tracking capabilities. There's over 280 incident types. We have over 600,000 data sources that are searching for all of these types and providing information to our users in risk. And in terms of how it works, I really won't just cover through a lot in terms of this slide, but really the key takeaways here that we're leveraging both this external incident data that we just talked about on the previous slide, and we're then also leveraging your supplier engagements, the risk processes that you're able to support, popping that into our scoring model with the ultimate goal of ensuring business continuity around supply chain, protecting business reputation, and of course, in the day of cyber attacks and hacking and information privacy, and that is, your information security compliance is really critical. So I'm now just going to jump directly into system, and we'll take a quick look. Okay. So I'm currently now in Ariba Supplier Risk Management, and you'll see for any users on the call today that are already using Ariba, it's embedded directly within your Ariba solution. This is part of this integrated solution approach that the research was talking about earlier. I can see for this supplier here that they've actually been part of our SLP supplier lifecycle management onboarding process. So, the first key takeaway here is, if you're managing a supplier within the Ariba solution, automatically this risk tab is going to become available. And the risk tab will provide the detailed information that is required to kind of manage and assess the risk of any particular supplier. So you'll see we've been monitoring this supplier, and there is a risk exposure graph that will provide the trend around that supplier as it goes, as your relationship continues with them. And the key elements around regulatory, environmental, operational, and financial are captured in this view. So there are different types of risk, and some organizations may focus more on regulatory, legal, environmental, and social, and financial. And it all really depends on the organization. So, for example, in oil and gas, we see environmental and social can be very critical because those are impacts that often, those sorts of industries, may get a lot of flack for, or may be very, people may be very observant on in terms of what they're doing. So when we drill a little bit further into this, we can actually see that the system is capturing a whole range of risk incidents behind the scenes. And this goes back a lot before when, this is data that's been captured and collated from this supplier, predating when I've actually added this supplier to my system. So you'll see here that it categorizes all your different risk types, groups them up, and in this example we're sorting by date, and you're able to very easily filter over in the top filter screen here through all of the types of incidents that have occurred with this supplier. So you can see there's been quite a lot of activity on this supplier. So for example, if I select divestment, this will then show me all the divestment risks that, or incidents that may have occurred for this particular supplier. So let me drill into one of these. You can see that there's an article. Let me go and select that article. So this will take me directly to the source information, and we can see that Tata, they divested from some data center organization in Singapore. So if I was reading this, and if this was a service, data center services through Tata that I was potentially looking at, in terms of engaging in a tender or something, this might be very relevant information for me to assess. So I'll talk a little bit about, in terms of what we do when we discover the issues first, but the first element is there are incidents that are coming through the system that you're able to very easily monitor. These will also be sent directly to your email, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. In terms of some of the other information that the system captures, every supplier that gets added to supplier risk is automatically enriched through the Dun & Bradstreet enrichment process that we have a relationship with. So this will go through the millions of records that they support and capture information, provide some of those legal requirements, diversity indicators, but also a really critical element is to understand the relationships, the organization. So you can see here, for example, Tata has a lot of organizations that some viewers of this data may not have been aware from previously. So, the ability to see what those parentages are, what those other relationships, related subsidiaries, does give a complete view and an understanding of, if I've had some engagement with a separate entity, that may be relevant in my engagement with this entity here. We also have some other information in terms of, the overall global and domestic information around contact details, and we provide also World Economic Forum rankings around all the various metrics, labour market efficiency, and that in terms of this organisation, and you're able to access the full link directly in system here. But let's say in terms of our process, we're monitoring the risk. We've identified him, for example, that divestment that occurred earlier. What happens when we need to now actually take an action? We need to assess whether we should be engaging with this supplier. What's the next step, and what do we do? So we're actually able to leverage something called engagement requests. So this is where we go beyond just monitoring. So we're not just here to monitor risk. We're also providing the key elements around that whole process management. We don't want someone to see a risk incident and then go chuck an Outlook email and write a Word document letter. We want that process to be in system so it's accessible, auditable. You can put it through a governed process. So Tata, we've already run a number of engagement requests. For example, we're looking at using them for an ECC upgrade. And if I click into that, that will bring me into this engagement request, and I can see that it's able to support a whole bunch of services through the process of what are we engaging them about, what are we interested in, who the supplier is, what the approval flow might look like in terms of the approval flow, tasks that may be requiring my approving or ability to approve or deny, and we leverage automated system controls to basically drive consistent risk management. So whenever somebody in the organisation says, okay, we're potentially running a tender for Tata in this process, so we're going to run an engagement risk process, that process needs to have all of these risk controls taken into account. So we're looking at financial, human resource, business process, information security, and all of these controls will automatically determine that there needs to be a number of risk assessments that are going to be entered, and these risk assessments can be sent to the supplier for them to fill out, can be also sent to internal stakeholders. So this is very much where we ourselves are not just relying on what incidents and other feeds are providing. We are actually going to provide our own tailored questions to go and assess, the engagement around a particular supplier. And through that process, as we go through it and all the stakeholders and levels of approval, if we do encounter an issue, we're able to very easily go and create an issue. So let's say we do uncover something that does require a little bit of a risk mitigation approach. We're actually able to create an issue, and that is a mandated process where we can go and look at what is the issue, what's the root cause, and then determine, how do we mitigate it? Do we look at some contractual terms? Do we limit, the amount of exposure in terms of, activity that we do with the supplier, whatever the scenario may be. And the key thing, every organisation is different. Each supplier that they're working with, they'll have a different risk threshold, a different set of requirements, and you're able to reflect them directly here in system. So that's the supplier view of risk that you're able to achieve in our solution. I want to go back and look at more of a macro view. So in terms of a macro view, I'm now going to my dashboard. This dashboard is tailored for me as myself as a user. And the key thing with this dashboard, it will be tailored to the type of users that you need access to. As I talked about earlier, a supply chain manager may only be interested in viewing data around supply chain suppliers, but not interested in your advertising and your law firms and those sorts of things. So everybody can tailor these dashboards to see the suppliers that make sense for them. We've got the ability to see a number of types of risk, right, in terms of maybe we're looking at how many medium and low risk suppliers that we have, and we're able to drill into that. We're able to also look by different categories where, some of the high risk suppliers may be, and from here we can drill directly into these suppliers and take a further, a look at them like we did a little bit earlier. Over to the right here, we have an alert feed. This is continually updated through those 600,000 sources. And a key element here is these lists are able to be sent as an email, and I'll talk a little bit about that configuration, but you're able to opt in and suggest and say, I'm interested in particular, management change. I don't particularly care. It's a low. I don't want to send an email, but if there's a plant disruption, because I'm a supply chain manager, that's very critical, and I need to take some action around that. You've obviously got the ability as well in here to, to be able to share that data out a little bit further. So somebody else that maybe doesn't have access to the system, you can go and share that information very easily with them. All right. So let's just jump back to our suppliers. So just to touch a little bit more on this macro view. We've also got a geography type view, a world map that will show where all the suppliers I'm following are located. So this is just my view. I actually have over 1,000 suppliers in my particular system that I'm demonstrating today, but me as a user, I've gone and selected a bunch of them that I want to follow. And you're able to drill into and look at where these particular suppliers are active, right down to the particular locations. This can be very useful in terms of, monitoring and, where are the more risky locations in terms of all risk types, as well as for forced labour as well. And one of the beauties of this is sometimes where you might get natural disasters or other that are regional issues, sometimes just being able to look at a map and seeing, hey, where are all our suppliers in a particular location can be a great way of just immediately identifying in a visual way that there may be some risks in those areas. And the suppliers which I'm following are all available here down the list. It's very straightforward to add suppliers to that. Literally, you just need to go and if I want to go and search for additional suppliers to go and add, I can literally type them into my search box here. This will give me access to all the suppliers that we have added to the system. And currently I'm following this one, but I can, for example, if I want to follow that one, I can say follow, and that will be now added to my particular record there. So in a couple of minutes, just sort of left over to talk a little bit about some of the administrative side of things that the system supports. You have the ability around configuring alerts that I talked about earlier. So as a user, what do I want to receive an email for? What don't I? And everybody's threshold around what constitutes a high, medium, or low incident. You can certainly, adjust to the kind of profile that your organisation has. We've also got the ability to actually change the whole scoring mechanism around, category weights and those sorts of elements to, what is more important to me. Maybe I want to increase operational and financial risk and reduce a little bit of environmental in that process. And that can even go down to field configuration. So we track elements like lawsuits and, UCC filings, liens, and you can set your own threshold to mean what is low to risk it. What is low, what is riskier. And of course, the implementation folks around this can help you with, what may be best practice. But every organisation, and particularly if you've been working in the risk area, you'll be able to bring your own assessment in terms of, what are those risks that you need to, where do you view the thresholds around what's low, medium, and high. And probably just the final element here really is around custom fields. We have organisations that want to bring in operational data, for example. They want to bring DIFO or other data, perhaps from the ERP system or any other kind of custom data. So there's the ability to bring in custom data and actually have them embedded here within the risk solution as well. So there's some great opportunity to maybe bring something very specific to your organisation that may not be necessarily, provided standard here in this risk solution. So we're on 20 minutes. I'll just probably jump back to my main dashboard there, so I can perhaps stop sharing and hand over to Ken, see if there are any questions.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Sanad. So yeah, some great content in a very limited amount of time. So I certainly hope our audience found it insightful. I know there are a number of questions we already have, but if you do have a question now and have not yet entered it into the Q&A tool, now would be the time to do that. Before we jump into a few questions, just by ways of a very quick commercial, I do want to mention that this supplier risk demo webinar is the first in a series of webinars that SAP Ariba and SAP Fieldglass are planning to hold. To get a full list of topics, the best thing you can do is go ahead and just Google SAP Ariba demo, and you'll find a landing page on ariba.com where you can check out those topics and sign up for the ones that you may be interested in viewing. We hope to see you on future demo webinars. So without further ado then, so first of all, there were a couple questions that came through about recording for today's session. Yes, there will be a link sent out for that will provide a recording to the session to everyone who registered. So rest assured that you'll be able to check this out again. And with that said, then let's go ahead and move on to a few questions. I will do my best to field a few of these, Sanad. So the first thing, it looks like there's a couple questions around the source of the data and some of the things that you showed. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on the source of data that SAP Ariba is using in some of this risk categorization?
Yeah, so we leverage with a partnership with Semantic Vision. So in terms of the 600,000 sources, there's a little bit of commercial IP behind that, so we don't readily share some of that information, but we are leveraging basically news feeds, court filings, watch lists. There's a number of feeds that system provides. We could probably, if we follow it up, we might be able to get a little bit more information. There's obviously some commercial and confidence elements, from a competitive point of view that we don't necessarily share. But, we can probably give you some indications of the types of information that we share. So we're happy to sort of follow up on that one later on.
Perfect. So moving along, the next one. So, and this is kind of a specific question, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. So is the hierarchy under the risk tile in the 360 view at enriched corporate information linked to the supplier setup hierarchy of SLP, or is it just something like it's an image but received from DMB, for example?
No. So it's in terms of SLP, this is independent of SLP, because SLP obviously may have your own hierarchy. This is an independent assessment of what those relationships may be. So that is provided by DMB, and it kind of would be something that if you are working in your SLP side with suppliers, you're able, this may be a cross-check to say, well, are there any other relationships that I'm not aware of? So it doesn't necessarily reflect against the SLP side.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying it. And maybe a follow-up to that, Sanad, on the commercial side. So do customers need to purchase any other Ariba solution as a prerequisite to subscribe to Ariba Supplier Risk, or is the solution bundled with some of the other solutions, or is it available standalone?
Very much like the rest of Ariba, it is very much module. You can take whatever makes sense for you. So you are able to leverage supplier risk on its own. Certainly, my recommendation to the customers I talk to, it does work very well with your SLP onboarding, because I believe a lot of your risk management does start at your onboarding process and then flow into risk around your engagement risk. So yes, you can buy that, or get that module up and running pretty much independently. But I do encourage, that if you are looking at supply management, that those two do work very closely hand in hand.
Perfect. The next one, and I think you actually addressed this later in the session, but let me go ahead and ask anyway, just for you can maybe clarify or elaborate a little bit, Sanad. So can the risk assessment be used to give a risk level for a supplier? And can the weights be managed related to financial risk, legal risk, those types of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as part of that configuration, so as part of your implementation process with this, is they would sit with you and open that spreadsheet that I showed a little bit earlier in the presentation, and they would work through and talk about the various areas, and then you can reflect your own weightings in there. So yes, that's absolutely the capability that we can support.
Perfect. What about, next question, are there any plans to make this information available on mobile devices?
Yes, so we do have that. We do have in our roadmap to certainly expand this out to mobile devices. I mean, typically with most Ariba, like if you're running a tablet through a browser, you're able to access most of the information anyway. But in terms of mobile, yes, there's certainly enhancements on the way in that particular area.
Perfect. So there are a number of questions here, I think, about kind of the source, and kind of folks digging deeper. I know, to your point, not this is a bit proprietary, but there's some information. So a question specifically around how many non-media content providers do you have integrated into the system, and how often do you update these? Is there anything else that you can share on that end of things? There are a few questions related to that.
Yeah, so I think we had this question in the past, and I've had some lists that so we do have some relationships around various jurisdictions. For example, with court filing, it's not necessarily all media websites. So we've got where there is a feed that we can kind of pull data into. We've gone and reached out. In terms of court filing websites that may provide, an API or the ability to get data. So, in terms, it is more than just news feed media. And in terms of, I think the second part of that question was, are they static or are they being updated? I think it's fair to say that this is continually being updated. I've seen within 6 months probably like 150,000 sources being added. And in terms of that process, we're expanding. You'll see on this slide here, it talks about German, the various Chinese languages, Spanish, English, Italian. We've now expanded that to Russian, French. So alongside with that, we're also expanding to sources in those languages as well. So this is a fluid, continually evolving system. We're here to make sure we're continually relevant and on top of, the risk monitoring. So, we will absolutely, this is something that's going to be continually updated and kept in to date. And it's something we can probably take away. We'll see what additional information we are able to share, maybe a bit more of a snapshot, something that Ken and myself can take away.
Yeah, makes sense. Next question. So this is a bit of a community question. So would the audits and assessments carried out by different organizations on a specific vendor be available to other organizations of SAP Ariba users?
So it's an interesting question. We see that actually in Australia around the forced labour side, whether the ability to share some elements around forced labour. So there's obviously a little bit around privacy and those sorts of legal elements that to work through. At the moment, we don't share that data. It is your realm specific, because also some of the questions you may be asking may be commercial in confidence. So it's a bit of a balance, because you may ask questions about your specific site requirements and that you might not want publicly available, or because the supplier's response would be to that question. So there's some elements that do need to be worked through on that. And I know we had in the Ariba Live here recently in Australia, we had a meeting with a whole room of very interested customers talking about, what options do we have around, sharing data. So that is something that actually has been raised with us, and our sort of leaders in the area are actively talking and discussing around, what can we do legally, what can we do around that whole privacy and other aspect to kind of get to somewhere where we can share that data.
Makes sense again. So maybe one or two more questions here in the final minute or two that we have, Sanad, and to everyone who's still hanging on the line here. So the next question is on integration, and it's a very brief question actually, and certainly I think integration can go so many different directions, right? But let me kind of ask the question as it was stated, Sanad, and I'll let you kind of react to it as best you can. And so the question is Ariba, SAP Ariba Supplier Risk Management integrated with, certainly it's integrated with Ariba, but with other Ariba solutions as well as SAP S4 and C4 HANA?
Yes, so in terms of the SAP ecosystem, we're fully compliant, with your ECCs, your S4s, in terms of integration. We do have people that are running Ariba in non-SAP systems, and you're absolutely able to look at bringing supplier data in from those systems into Ariba. So, we are also ERP agnostic. So depending on the type of solutions that you're looking at integrating, it's something you just need to talk with your local SAP representative about what you're looking for. But we've certainly created that back-end system to leverage, in an integration-focused world is probably a good way of saying it.
Great. Thank you, Sanad. And certainly I want to thank everyone who spent the time with us today. whether it be your afternoon or evening, or morning for that matter. So hopefully, again, you found this very useful. There will be, as I said, follow-ups with additional information. Certainly, if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to through Ariba.com or your respective account executive, and we're happy to have a further conversation with you on SAP Ariba Supplier Risk. So again, Sanat, thank you. Thanks to everyone who attended, and everyone, hope you have a great day.